Hi, I'm Tim, and welcome to Collector Conversations. Organic. What is it about organic? It's the food we can't afford, it's the chemistry we can't figure out, and it's the watch collection we can't just go out and buy. An organic watch collection is something that grows with the collector. And today, we have an incredible array of Rolex, contemporary and vintage. Shawn, welcome.
It's good to be here.
This is going to be fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
So now the oldest watch in the collection is not necessarily the first watch you acquired in the collection.
No, by no means.
Let's start with where your watch passion comes from, and then let's jump to the box. What was the first watch?
Yeah, it's a great question. First off, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. Like most people that watch your channel, we fell in love with your voice first, got to know you as a person. It's great to be sitting across from you right now doing this. When it comes to watch collecting, it's the same story I tell everybody. 11 years old, I have no reason to recall why, but I asked my grandmother for a watch. And we walked all around the mall. She bought me a Fossil watch, had subdials in it, had no clue what they did. I had no clue what the watch did, I just wanted one. I still have that watch in my collection today with all these other ones. And, I've worn a watch every day since I was 11. And I think I had a very inside-out process of falling in love with the representation of what a timepiece means to me and the sentimentality behind it. And like I was telling you earlier, it's always a wrestling between what it means to you intrinsically and then how cool the darn thing is when you look at it, And I think both those things taken into consideration, it's just become my life's passion.
So now, there are several paths that you've walked as a collector. Rolex is one of them, and I think it's interesting because you have a collection that spans many eras, including quite a few decades before either of us was born.
Right.
So how did you come to develop a passion for Rolex, and what was the first step in that journey?
That's a great question. I think the thing that interests me the most about these watches are the stories that they tell before I knew what they were or before I even knew what life was. I can't remember what was going on in 1980, 1973. I have no recollection of it. I wasn't here. But they do, Some of these watches were gifts. Some of these are, you've seen they're engraved, commemorative pieces to, share a special moment in someone's life or career. And, I was none the wiser to it. And I think it's really interesting to take a look at some.
So now right here, you've got an Oyster Perpetual that's been engraved with basically a man's life story. George Ritchie, to mark a quarter century of continuous service, Dominion Securities, 1934 to 1959. Do you gravitate towards watches like this that have an established and readily apparent history?
Absolutely do. I do. I think when I bought that watch, one of the things that excited me the most about it was the story. And I think what excited me about it was they wanted not only to put his name on it, but they wanted him to remember what he had achieved in the time he was there. I think, given the math, that's 25 years. Yeah.
And what's incredible to me is not only is it a quarter century, but they actually gave him a watch.
Yeah.
Who does that anymore?
I don't know. Nobody's ever, just given me a watch, to celebrate any type of professional achievement, that's for sure.
So it's not just that, this is a microcosm of a man's professional life. It's also an insight into maybe a kinder, gentler era of corporate, existence.
I think so, yeah.
I gotta say, guys, if your company is gonna give you a gold watch when you retire, you're right, you're with the right firm. I think this is the exception rather than the rule, and I think that is sort of a mark not just of the age in which he lived, but I think of a different kind of society. Gratitude.
Yeah.
That's an interesting concept.
I think we become so cynical at times. We think, they can afford to give me this, they're not paying me enough, And at this time, it was a team effort. It was a family effort.
And it's also interesting because back then, by no means were all Rolex watches gold and chronometers.
Right.
They bought him an above-average Rolex watch, even by the standards of the time.
I know. That's the thing that kind of interests me, especially about the Day-Date. The single quick Day-Date. One of the things I found most fascinating about it is it looks like it was a retirement watch. This one, like I told you earlier, was my birth year watch. Collectors love to have at least one birth year watch.
I'm still working on that.
I know you are. And, for this one, I think what's so fascinating about it is not just the fact that it's absolutely beautiful. Also, retailed at Tiffany's, which is pretty cool. But the guy that they got it for, they went to great efforts to get him something very specific. It's got a tapestry dial, solid gold, everything about it is very specific to a look that they wanted him to have. And somebody went and did this, and I think that's the thing that really interests me the most. Somebody took the time to go out and get Mr. Decker his dream watch, or a watch that really to them said, this is what we think of what you've achieved. Thank you.
And it truly is touching. April 24th, 1986, I wasn't yet 2 years old, and they went out and they bought him a full gold, full bracelet, Tiffany Dial Day-Date. This is the meaning of gratitude. This is more than just cupcakes on your birthday at a company. And I love the fact that all of these things are lived in. There's new watches in the collection, but for the most part, you're looking back more than you're looking forward. Now,
absolutely.
You're in theater. Do you bring an artist's perspective to collecting watches?
I hope so. I don't know. I think I do. I think that this kind of represents a tremendous identity crisis. You've got watches in here that are unique to me, things that, like the golden egg, or like the historic pieces that we have in here. Listen, they're really, really interesting. But then we got some pieces in here that are very well hyped. And I think it just shows that, the art is what you make of it. The OP41, the green dial, it's a modern watch, and it's a simple watch. It's time only. It does exactly what you expect a watch or a clock to do.
Now, just in terms of the vintage pieces you have, a lot of them are very unique, and I think anything that's engraved is effectively a one-off. Are you drawn to the watch style itself, and then the dedication or the history is what seals the deal? Or do you primarily aim for something that has a tangible story to it?
Yes, both of those are true. It just depends on the situation. I think that the engravement or the detail behind it makes it more special. To go back to the single quick Tiffany dial, the Day-Date, when I saw that, what attracted me to it was the history of the marriage between Rolex and Tiffany that existed in that time. But the thing that I always have a question about is I want to know, what did it mean to them? Because we know as watch collectors, and we know in the watch world what it means to have a Rolex that's stamped Tiffany, especially if it's been authenticated. Yes. And it has the paperwork behind it to back it up. What did it mean to them? Was that just a place that they went? Is that there's like, oh, we'll just go down to Tiffany's to get it for them? I saw they had a couple.
Yeah, across the street from the office.
Yeah, it was the closest one. Did they look at the Tiffany stamp and go, well, it says Tiffany's, that's kind of a ladies thing. We don't know. I don't know what their mindset was back then. And I find that so interesting. So when I saw that, I wanted to know more about the story, and then I saw the back, and then I found it was interesting. And then I found out it was my birth year. So you start to take interest, like most things. It passes the eye test. It's becoming attracted to a watch. You're initially attracted to it, and then you're inquisitive about it, and then you find yourself emotionally attached to it.
And it is fascinating to me that this watch, this was the apex predator of its day. A full gold Day-Date in the mid-'80s, 1986.
And they were not making them in anything larger than 36 back then.
This was, it wasn't about the Daytonas, it wasn't about the subs, it wasn't about the GMTs. Back then, that was the absolute king of the castle at Rolex. And if you think about it, it's been modified twice, because the Tiffany dial was done by Tiffany, and then the dedication was done by this man's employer. So this is actually a double customized watch.
Yeah, it's one of a kind in its own right. And I think it's fascinating to think, before the Day-Date took on many different forms, back then with the president bracelet, they'd always kind of, the colloquial term is the presidential, the Rolex presidential. And people always, this was what they sought after back then. This is the 80s kind of Wall Street sort of watch du jour back then.
It was an era that was all about conspicuous consumption. You had your shoulder pads, you had your yellow gold Day-Date, you rolled up in an Excalibur Series 4. That was it was the times. This one, it's redolent of the times, but also this man's life and times. But you had a fun story. You actually owned the car from Children of the Corn, and it taught you a lesson about going straight vintage.
Well, we were talking about a little bit earlier. We were talking a little bit about cars, and one thing that's a little bit different about me is most watch guys are huge car guys. I like a nice car. I like a nice car the way someone likes a nice watch. And, you know, back many years ago, got a little bit of a, you know, little wild ride, decided to get a car from the movie Children of the Corn. I didn't get it from the lot or anything like that. It just happened to be. It was a 66 Mustang. Broke down on the side of the highway on the first time it was driven.
And it broke down in the movie, too.
It broke down in the movie, and it stayed true to form all the way to the Dallas North Tollway. So
you know, you love the story. You love the story behind the watch. You love the story behind the car. But sometimes, you know, you were telling me it's just nice to have something that is modern watch durable,
Yes.
where there are no handling restrictions. And that's sort of where the OP41 green dial comes in.
absolutely, yeah. Some days you just want to wear something and just wear it. And some days you want to tell a story. Someday I want to wear a piece of history. You know, I want to wear something that tells someone else's story. It's interesting that I'm here talking about my watch collection. And that's nice, but this was somebody else's. These were all different factions of somebody else's watch collection. Whether it was their only watch or one of 20, who knows? I couldn't know. This one, retail piece, got it from my AD, and it tells my story. And it's really nice because it's a simple, easy piece, but man, it's a crowd pleaser. Everybody loves when you wear that green dial OP41.
And it really does take you right back to the birth of modern Rolex in
Yeah.
1933 when you combine the perpetual rotor winding system with the Oyster water-resistant case.
Absolutely.
This is a direct descendant of that. You know, more than any GMT, more than any sub, more than any Daytona, you know, this is the unchanging heart and soul of the Rolex sports watch catalog.
Yeah.
I can understand the reverence for the history and
Sure.
the convenience of wearing a very durable modern watch. But green, your choice or just what was available?
Green is never available, you know that.
I know.
I saw the green, and I think it wasn't just because, oh, it's green. I do love green. Green is a favorite color of mine, but I think what I liked about it was it holds a certain level of uniqueness in the type of green that they used. It has almost like a brush stroke green to it, almost like a paintbrush. You know, it's not an olive green, and it's not the bright green that you see in the John Mayer Daytona.
Yeah, it's not metallic, it's a gloss.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's got that wonderful kind of lustrous lacquer look to it.
Right.
Really deep and almost mirrored. You can sort of see yourself in this dial. And I guess, you know, you could see yourself in more ways than one on several
Right.
different levels in this watch. And green is like a very traditional Rolex corporate color. When you walk into a Rolex boutique, they have this company, Roladeco, that harmonizes the interior fittings. And one of the dominant themes is you can see green glass, green waves. And because Rolex green is so identifiable, for the anniversary of the Day-Date, well, tell me, what was the thought process behind your Day-Date 40?
That's a great question. So thought process is, when I saw this, I saw it on a poster, and I thought it was one of the most beautiful watches I've ever seen. Then I saw Roger Federer wear it when he won Wimbledon, and that was one of the most beautiful moments of my life as a huge fan of his. And that watch felt like the benchmark timepiece that says celebration. It's a watch that celebrates achievement. It celebrates Rolex's achievements. It celebrates the buyer's achievement in getting to own a piece like this, and then also the achievement of winning Wimbledon, whatever it might be.
A little bit of hero
A
worship.
little bit of hero worship.
In a good way.
Shameless hero worship.
In a
Come
good
on.
way.
You know, the thing I like about this one is, like I was telling you a little bit ago, this one is from the anniversary year of 2016. It's the actual 50th anniversary Day-Date. And I like that because, one, it is one of the most beautiful watches I've ever seen. From the standpoint of what it represents as a Rolex timepiece, I think it has all of the facets of a gorgeous Rolex, but they all marry together perfectly. The Roman numerals, the size, the weight, everything that it carries, obviously the bracelet, and everything, the history that comes with the Day-Date. I think it's fantastic.
And it is nice that you've got a couple of watches that represent different takes On green dials, you've got metallic, a little bit more olive toned. You've got gloss, a little bit more of the Kelly green. At the same time, you've got a modern Day-Date, but you've also got a vintage Day-Date. And so you have the juxtaposition of different takes on different styles, but also different eras of a very important watch family. And was rose gold just your thing? I mean, very uncommon in the 80s. Today you have more selection, but...
You know, I feel like yellow gold is what I gravitate towards with my eye. I think rose gold agrees with my skin tone a little bit better. However, with the vintage yellow gold, I like when it oxidizes and gets that sort of copper tint to it. I think it's so unique.
Yeah, you do have a little bit of that, I think they call it Boscoriale, kind of brownish, reddish tinge. And I think that just speaks to how untouched this watch is, because not only is that sort of surface oxidation present, but the lugs are as sharp as razors. It looks like it's never seen a refinisher's wheel.
It's good.
Yeah, that's the kind of watch you have to buy when it comes up, because you may never have another opportunity to own one that well preserved.
Let me ask you a question. In the way that Rolex is making their watches now, in 20, 30, 40 years, will we see that happening to the yellow gold the way that they're crafting their watches today?
I think the main reason, it's interesting, no one ever asks me questions on these.
Sorry.
No, it's good, it's good. I think that because the gold itself is always going to be an alloy, it's 18 karat, I think that there are secondary elements in there that develop that tarnish. It's not the gold itself, which is noble and wouldn't oxidize in any way. I think it's a little bit like sterling silver, which is 6% copper. The tarnish you see is that 6% copper.
Sure.
I think that as long as you're dealing with an alloy and not the pure material, it's always possible that something might develop.
Sure.
But it's really hard to say, because something like this, where you've got Ever-Rose, which is an alloy that goes heavy on platinum and white metals. This is really designed to be ever rosy, whereas previous rose golds, they would fade from rose to pink and pink to almost yellow. I think this is designed to be a lot more stable.
Right.
With yellow gold, I guess we're going to have to wait and see, but the problem is you've got to sort of let the watch sit forever untouched to find out, you know?
Yeah, call you in 30 years, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit like Schrodinger's cat. You know, if you look, the cat's dead.
Yeah.
But if you wear the watch, you're going to continuously run your skin and your cuff and water over the material. So the question really is, do you have the patience to let it sit in a drawer? I'm guessing not.
I'm probably not. No, you got to wear your watches.
You got to wear the watches. And you know, it's funny for me because you do wear your watches and you have no dogmas. This is about as traditional as it gets. Oyster Perpetual, plexiglass crystal, boy's size case. You got a big wrist, but you're drawn to this watch.
Absolutely.
How do you reconcile that?
I think the history of it, you know, 1939 is the estimated year, I believe, when this was made. One, I was fascinated when I saw it because it was running so beautifully. And when you wind it, you can hear the gears. It's so fresh, and everything about the watch is so intact for the time period that it came out. But I was telling a friend about this watch one time, and I said, you know, it's fascinating with the world on the cusp of falling to pieces. Switzerland was still making watches in a time that, you know, everything was changing. And I think with this one, what fascinates me the most about it is to think of the type of person that wore it at the time, and also how it's changed hands over the years. I'm always curious about, you know, we think it's 1939, but how did the watch fare in 1979? How did it fare in 1999? And it somehow ended up in my collection. And I just think about its journey and how cool that is. I mean, that's the oldest watch I've had in my collection by far. And I'm actually really, really proud of it. And I'm glad that it stood the test of time. And I'm glad it's still running as well as it is.
And I have to say, winding this watch is an absolute pleasure. The feeling of the click, the ratchet, the sound, the feel, like they nailed it. It's fun because, like you were saying, the things that this watch has seen, it survived a world war, a cold war, rock and roll, disco, the go-go 80s, the grunge 90s.
It was around for all of it. I don't know where it was, but it was around.
And you know, part of what stirs the imagination with a vintage watch is envisioning where it might have been through those years.
It could have been a watch that belonged to many people with the same last name, passed down through their family, or it could have been a watch that changed hands innumerable amount of times.
And it's kind of fun because, you know, you get to sort of guess at its past while writing your own story. This is actually interesting because you were talking about family associations here. This is a 16030 machined or engine-turned bezel. This is a Datejust with a very cool combo of silver dial, national crest, and yellow gold indices. How'd this happen?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so this watch is actually very interesting. I came across it. A good friend in Nashville told me about this watch, and I couldn't help but say yes because my family on my dad's side is from Iran. We have a lot of close relationships with the Middle East. My family's spent a lot of time living in Kuwait and in various regions around the Middle East. And the branded watches that were never retailed are so fascinating to me because these were gifts. And these were things that were given, whether at, Sultan of Oman, he's given out. We've all seen the Omani Khanjar watches that have made their rounds throughout the watch collecting world. Seeing this one, I think it's so cool how it's got all of that color that's coming through a very uniquely silver dial. I don't know if it's the hands and the indices that cause it to have that tint, but then just seeing the white and the black and the green on there, it just really stands out. And I don't know. I thought it was cool, man.
I got to agree, and again, your watches are beautiful. You buy the best up front because you can't refinish a case like this. If the metal's gone, the metal's gone. The metal's all here, and the lines are beautifully intact. I'd also say this, it's kind of cool because, like you said, there's almost a champagne tinge to this dial.
Yeah, there is.
And I can't tell whether it's real or if it's just the reflection of the gold indices and hands.
Right, that's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. And then, on top of all that, you've got these stark colors of the country flag on there and that crest that just really shoots off the page. I don't know, I just think it's fun. I also think it's fun that it's a Datejust. You see a lot of this happen in day-dates and these very luxurious watches that sort of represent the opulence of the Emirates or these countries and the oligarchs or the royalty that, receives these to give out as gifts. This one is a Datejust that if you strip it down, it's somebody's daily beater. But then they've added so much swag to it that now it's this whole new thing.
And it's got the grandeur. You've got the eagle, you've got the national flag, you've got what I believe are 7 stars representing the 7 Emirates. And the dial is beautifully intact. Every little pip of tritium lume is still there. And somehow it's become more perfect over time as that lumen has faded to almost become the color of the gold.
Yeah, that's exactly what I noticed when I saw it too.
So a really cool piece on that front with a great sort of family association. Now, GMTs. Let's start with what feels like the more exotic of the two.
Of course.
This is a watch that's clearly lived a somewhat more challenging life. This has been used, this has been traveled. But at the same time, it also has a grandeur to it. I don't think your run-of-the-mill pilot would have been wearing this back in the day.
No.
Where did you find this and what drew you to it? Because, again, a full gold GMT on a full gold Jubilee with nipple dial, with black bezel, that's a very particular look.
Absolutely, and it was the exact look I was going for. I found it in New York City. I sought this one out. I was surprised by how worn it was when I saw it, and then I was charmed by it. I think it was really fun to see. And if you look in the collection, you notice I do gravitate towards watches that are very wearable because I like to wear my pieces. I don't like to let them sit. I like them to be on my wrist, and I don't want to worry about something happening to it. I don't ever want the integrity or the history behind the watch destroyed by me haphazardly wearing it. In this case, I saw this and I put it on, and I immediately felt like this watch was exactly what I had in mind. I love the way that, again, the oxidization of the yellow gold and how it's sort of taken that almost burnt gold color was so interesting. And what's so fascinating about that time? They were using that yellow on the GMT markers on the bezel. And I think this might be, and I think the 1675 and the time that it came out, this might be the only year that I think that it matches properly because the numbers are much more gold in their tint. And over time, they have taken on this cartoonish yellow that I think is fine. But I just think on this one, the watch finally feels like it truly matches. And the 1675, as well as the 16750, all kind of have this unilateral quality to them.
What I really like here is, you say that it's been worn. It's been worn, but it hasn't been worn out.
No.
It has weathering from use, but not damage or reduction from refinishing, because the lugs are still completely full. In each case, the spring bar end is nowhere near the edge of the lug. So all of the gold is here. It's just been smoothed, rather. It's been weathered down a little bit. It's got some swirls, some scuffs, and some dents, but it's all there.
Yeah.
That's a really nice piece. And again, if you want to talk about like a typical mid-70s version of this watch, it's going to be steel, it's going to be a Pepsi bezel, it's going to be printed dial features, it's going to be on an Oyster bracelet. This is an interesting combination. I envision this back in the 70s being more the guy who travels on the Concorde rather than the guy who flies it.
Sure. Yep. I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so now let's also take a look, because I don't want to slight Pepsis or steal GMTs.
Well, this one's interesting because this is a 16750. But it, to me, gives 1675 energy. It has a very 1675 feel to it. And when I picked it up, that's exactly what I thought it was. And then as I continued to sort of examine it more, I was like, no, this is just a little bit newer than that. And then I looked into the details of it, the papers, all that stuff. And I realized, I'm like, no, this is 16750, sure enough. And I kind of like that it's such an early stage of that transition from 1675 to the next generation of GMT.
Yeah, the transitional Rolex watches have a fan club all their own. I think,
they really do.
The 5-digit watches, that could be like a collection theme in and of itself.
Yeah, really could.
But what I really love here is, because it does have so much intact patina, if you didn't check the quickset, you could sort of be lulled into thinking this is like a 70s era 1675. And the bracelet, I gotta say, look, they gain play over time, but they resolutely refuse to quit. Like these.
Oh, absolutely.
There's something about the rattle of a traditional hollow center link, hollow end link Rolex bracelet. How do you feel about that? Do you prefer the wrist feel of the vintage watches or the modern solid everything bracelets?
That's a great question. I wish I could say unequivocally I prefer the vintage one top to bottom. No, I feel much more comfortable wearing a modern stainless or well, really any type of reasonably new Rolex feels much more comfortable on the wrist to me. That one, I'm aware of it. You know what I mean? You can hear it, you can feel it, and you can feel the slink. It doesn't sit, parallel with the wrist at times. The case will move forward. The bracelet will stay where it is a little bit. And I enjoy that though, because I do feel like while I'm wearing it, I'm also caring for it. And you have a responsibility to these watches, no matter how new or old they are. And I think as far as comfort goes, sure, give me the OP41. I feel right at home with that on the wrist. With the old GMTs, you gotta be a little bit more careful. I think what I like about it is the fact that it's something unique and different than you see out in the wild very often.
It is by definition unique, because each one becomes an individual. They're so non-standard due to how they're worn and who wears them and under what conditions. It's almost like the watch takes on the cumulative personalities of all the people who wore it down the line before it reaches you. But you also said that you liked wearing a modern watch from time to time.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's a good story behind this Daytona. You were originally looking at a 16520 Zenith, maybe a Patrici dial, but you decided you really didn't want the patina or the challenge of finding a well-preserved example.
Right, absolutely. I was intent on finding a 16520. I wanted the Patrici dial, black dial. I love the patina. I love the history of the Zenith. I love the marriage between the Zenith movement and Rolex. And I love what it represents. I wanted one with the inverted 6. I wanted one, heck, if I could find one with a floating Cosmo, that'd be cool too. But I came across this one and I was like, well, this is a standard, Daytona without the ceramic bezel, right?
6-digit pre-ceramic.
6-digit pre-ceramic. And I thought that was interesting. But then the more I looked at it, I was like, this is an everyday, just incredible privilege to wear. And it's an easy wear, and it goes with everything. You could wear it with athleisure clothes, you can wear it with a suit. And without it having to be a historic piece, it's just like a really nice piece before we got into this world of the ceramic Daytona, which is fascinating. And I love what they've done with it. But this one just sort of represents, it's like, it's a little bit older than that, but not so old that I have to handle it with gloves,
It is interesting because now it's very identifiable as that Daytona that was made from 2000 to 2015, the metal bezel era, and it's got a very charming look to it, and it's something you can't get anymore. So sometimes we pick watches that remind us of an era in time, and at a glance you say, oh, metal bezel, seconds at 6 digit, pre-ceramic, you know what you're looking at. Goes in the water, shock resistant, reasonably anti-magnetic, a modern watch with no excuses. There's no questions about, patrimony of a vintage piece and how it was treated or whether it's an assembly of parts. There's the certainty of, it's almost like buying a modern car. Yeah. Sometimes you have to wonder if that 1963 fuel-injected Stingray was made that way.
Right.
You don't have to worry about buying like a 2015. That's how it was built.
Yeah, and absolutely. And on the years you talked about, this going from, I think the 116520 started in 2000. Was it 2000, 2015 is what you said?
Yeah, and that 2015 would have been the end of like the metal steel bezel. After that, you're either getting precious metal bezels or you're getting ceramic.
Right.
So this is this is that period. This is what Rolex envisioned the first in-house caliber Daytona would look like.
Can you imagine, can you even fathom how much your life changed from 2000 to 2015?
Yeah, well, let's see. I've been working in this industry now for 10 years, whereas back in 2000, I mean, that was more than half my life.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's one way
exactly.
to look at it. I was in high school.
Yeah, so was I.
So sometimes you can have it all. And an example of that would be the watch on your wrist.
Okay.
You talk about the condition of a modern watch.
Right.
And then you talk about the charm of a vintage watch.
Sure.
And then you talk about a watch that has kind of a redolent of a period quality to it. That 4354 Cellini on your wrist.
Right.
This thing is the end of the world.
Here, let me give it to you so that you can...
Oh my gosh. So you've heard of the integrated bracelet Rolexes. People talk about 1530s, 1630s, 5100 Texans, and Oyster Quartz, but a lot of folks don't know about this Onyx Dial, Onyx Bezel, integrated bracelet, 4354 Cellini. And I have to say, this is the most intact early 80s Rolex I've seen in my life. The tolerance of the bracelet, the lines of the case, even the little subtle flared bevels on the lugs, this looks like he just bought it at a Rolex jeweler in 1984, which is my birth year.
That's very cool to know.
What is the story about how you found this? Because these don't come around often, and they don't come around twice.
I got very fortunate with this one. A good friend of mine who's also a watch dealer, he told me about it. He got a hold of it and shared it with me. I've always been, I know they're not really represented here, but I'm a huge fan of Cellini. I was telling you before that I think Cellini in a lot of ways could be the next generation's Daytona. I think that...
In the sense that they were underappreciated
Yes.
and then later recognized.
Absolutely. I mean, especially now that they're not around. The scarcity of them and the fact that, we've hyper-popularized these stainless steel sport watches as these high luxury timepieces, and Rolex has been just quietly, without any relent, making dress watches and different variations of it. They've made dual times. They've made one with a date. They've made one with a moon phase. That Cellini moon phase is fantastic, And
You really should consider the Cellini moon
really,
phase.
really cool watch. And they've made all these different models of Cellini's along the way. All these unique references and these different dials that from the brown guilloche dial and the dual time, then the black, and then this beautiful white. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And then the stark white on the moon phase.
And that's without even getting into the Cellini princes, which are a universe unto themselves.
and the princes, there's 4 of them, right? Collect them all. My goodness, you got a white gold, you got a rose, the yellow gold, which is both of our favorites.
And I should say, you've got one of those at home. It's not here, but it's lurking in the background.
It is. And then the stainless model that, lo and behold, also has a purple dial, of all things. All of these with an open case back and manual wind. They're fantastic watches. And Cellini is just this elaborate, detailed thing. The Cellinium, the platinum Cellini that they made. I've always been a huge enthusiast of what Rolex has done with Cellini. And I will always appreciate what they did. And I don't think I could ever collect enough of them. So when I saw this, I realized in that moment there is nothing more unique that I'll ever be able to get my hands on than a Cellini with an integrated bracelet and an Onyx Dial in yellow gold with the history that it has, and if I may say, box and papers. It's got it
A
all.
vintage Rolex from the 80s with box and papers.
It's got everything, and it's just, it was too good to be true. So I made it work.
So let me know, this is, I don't want to say this is the collection that has everything, but it definitely covers all the bases. What future paths can you envision for this collection?
I got to be sincere and say I just want to be a good steward of what I already have. You know, we talked a little bit at lunch about, you know, the ability to appreciate something without feeling the need to acquire it.
Yes.
Sorry,
happy to live in a world where it exists.
We're happy to live in the world where these exist, and we don't feel this absolute urge to just acquire something and have it and hoard it to ourselves when we can just appreciate what it is. And there's such an endless well and world of watches out there that I could own or want to own, or I could keep a wish list. I don't want a wish list, because then every time I achieve something on it, I'm having to replace the wish with something else that I don't have. And I just want to appreciate what I have and hope that I hold on to these and give a good home to them. But also, I hope I can see other people, especially in the watch collecting world, start to really love these vintage pieces as much as we do these big, cool hype pieces that come out. Because Rolex is making some cool stuff right now, but they've been doing it for a long time. And I like these pieces that sort of represent a time where they didn't realize how cool they were. You know, not saying Rolex themselves, but we didn't realize.
But yeah, like that's the whole idea. The joy of discovery with something like this, that's more exciting than getting something that you know was 3-year wait listed at a dealer. You know it's coming. It's going to be uniform. It's going to be exactly like what's on the website. Something like this pops up, and maybe that's just what it means to have a truly organic collection. You don't know what's next.
Well, Tim, I got to be honest with you. When I got this watch, I didn't know how cool it'd be when I saw the photos of it. I saw the photos and I was like, wow, that's right along the lines of something I would collect. Wow, that's really, really neat. I really feel like I need to own this. So I bought it, then I got it in, and I was blown away. It was so much cooler than I thought it'd be. I didn't know how cool this watch was until you told me. I didn't totally know. I knew how cool I thought it was, and then I got here and you gushed over this watch. I'm walking out of the bathroom and somebody else here in the office is gushing over the watch. And I realized, I'm like, okay, so this is the coolest watch I own. Cool, now I know. I've always wondered, there it is. And I am just blown away by the response of true professionals and watch people and enthusiasts that look at that and go, that is the most complete thing you have.
And I will say this might be the only Rolex non-sports watch I've ever seen that has any kind of numerals printed on the bezel.
Isn't that fascinating?
That really is.
Yeah.
And frankly,
it gives jewelry with that too. I like it.
Who's even looking for this these days? It's not on anyone's radar. This is part of the joy of Rolex because yes, they make the most recognizable watches in the world, but at the same time, when you make that many, there's stuff out there even experts have never heard of. And that joy of seeing it for the first time, that's why we collect watches.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shawn, thank you so much.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.